Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the PAUK radio network. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are joined in the studio by Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello guys.
Hello.
Hello, how have you been?
Really good, thanks.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Have you recovered from all the paranormal investigating you've been doing lately?
Just about, yeah. I'm still working on the report because I like to write up the experiences we've had and have some reflection on it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what what I like to do. But yeah, interesting weekend, I think. You, Richard?
Yes, I done 2 investigations, and I think it caught up to me a bit the second night because I did actually fall asleep a couple of times, as you guys like to point out to me. But
It has to be done.
Oh yeah, we was actually going to stand up because at this location there was like full body skeletons and things, and we was going to put them all around you. So when you woke up, you just had
they were staring down at you. Yeah. We refrained. I would like to say that.
That's just how we roll.
Thank you. But a good weekend was had by all, I think.
It
Very
was.
much so. Yeah, it's a good weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we talking about tonight, Kerry? Because
Well,
we're somewhere still down that rabbit hole, aren't we?
we are a little bit because
We're lost.
I'm lost. I am totally lost down this rabbit hole at the moment, and it's not often that I admit that I am a little lost about something. Oh. Now, we enter the world of high strangeness, and when we were looking at the show for Portals last week, we missed a very intense location out. Very much in particular, actually, and I actually insisted we leave it out because the location was Skinwalker Ranch. It reminded me a lot of some of the paranormal phenomena that happened regarding another case, which was involving a Mr. John Keel, the Mothman prophecies.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just mean about paranormal occurrences. It enters it just is so much. Portals, poltergeist activity, strange creatures walking in the night, UFOs, a whole plethora, which is basically high strangeness. Now, when you delve down this hole, you kind of go, oh my God, where do you start with it? So I went, who do I know that is just like so knowledgeable about this topic? Well, on PAUK, there is another show called the High Strangeness Factor, funny enough. And it is hosted by the amazing Mr. Steve Ward. So I called on him and I went, help! And he went, okay, let's do a show on it. It's like, brilliant. Mr. Steve Ward, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever been called the amazing Mr. Steve Ward, but I'll take it.
Well, you can now put that in your resume.
I will, and I can. I'll put you as a contact.
Excellent.
Well, I am the amazing Kerry Greenaway.
You're gonna have a star on the Walk of Fame right next to the amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So we've gone down this hole, Steve, and I first hit this hole probably about 5 years ago when I read the Mothman prophecies, and got introduced to a character called Mr. John Keel, an amazing character all by himself. But you've been involved in this for, gosh, a long, long time, haven't you? You've researched this and looked into this kind of strange occurrences for an awful long time.
Yes, I was alerted to the Mothman even before they had dubbed him the Mothman. This goes back to 1966. I grew up just north of Detroit, and this is there was a huge UFO flap going on kind of west of Detroit. By the way, I grew up pretty close to the infamous 8 Mile Road. You've heard of 8 Mile, Eminem and all that sort of thing?
Yep.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But I must stress I was not close enough to have any street cred. So I never, I just never had that that level of credibility. But
I think you do now.
but when it happened, I was in junior high, so I didn't really have a vehicle to play UFO investigator. But it was amazing because there was this UFO flap was they were seen in Ann Arbor, Hillsdale and Dexter and other areas. And you can easily check that on a map going out from Detroit. And very credible people were seeing these things. Police officers. There was a famous landing on the Frank Manor farm in Dexter. Project Blue Book was still operating at that time. Dr. J. Allen Hynek came on the scene back when he was still, unfortunately, tied to Blue Book. And this is the time when this is leading up to the Mothman stuff. This was March, and this is when he had a news conference. Now, imagine he's still trying to straddle this fence. He's begun to, after being a skeptic, he's saying that there's a lot to these sightings. There's something really going on. He is a colleague at that time with Dr. Jacques Vallée, and during in this infamous press conference, what he was saying was that he thought some of the sightings in Hillsdale. There was a women's college at that time, and they had this view of there was kind of a swampy area across from them. He thought some of the sightings might be explained as swamp gas. Well, of course, that's all the news media needed to hear. The UFO mystery's been solved. It's marsh gas. So it was funny because 10 years later, I went to a MUFON symposium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dr. Hynek was speaking there. Now, this is sometime after he left Blue Book, became one of the good guys, and he started the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois, and a real, serious UFO investigating group. And he recounted those days of yesteryear when, and it was quite humorous because he would show cartoons up on the screen, all based on the swamp gas stuff. There's one hilarious one where you see the little green men with their very powerful ray guns, and they just landed in their saucer. They've stopped a civilian on the street, and the caption says, "Take us to the one that called us swamp gas." But and the name of his talk was Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting. So he talked about those times and the mistakes he made and what they were doing then. So it was it was kind of a nice arc to have all that. And I actually even have that recording of that. My little cassette recorder. I changed it over to CD. But several months later, November 1966. That's the first flyover, the first major one of the Mothman, and they were just calling it a winged humanoid or the bird at that time, and that was where the two couples, the Scarberrys and the Mallets, they were out north of Point Pleasant in what they call the TNT area. The TNT area was during World War II. If you look at the old black and white photographs, it was a huge complex where they made explosives for the war effort. And they stored a lot of them in these, what they called these concrete bunkers. We just call them the igloos. And they were grown over with foliage so that if the enemy ever flew over, it would just look like terrain. Well, by the mid-60s, it was all abandoned. There was the old North Power Plant. And that's where they saw this thing. Sort of humanoid shape, a wingspan of about 10 feet, piercing red glowing eyes. Didn't seem to be eye shine. It seemed to actually generate its own light. And they took off and it chased them into town. And so that was again, it was seen a couple other places prior to that, but this was the one that hit the wire services. And that's what I remember reading as a kid about this winged creature chasing these people down Route 62 into Point Pleasant. So that's really how. Before that, I was reading books by. Do you guys remember Frank Edwards and the great anthologies he used to write? He was a newspaper reporter and a radio announcer, and he was a colleague of Donald Kehoe, who was the head of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Mm-hmm. It was sort of a lobbying group. They were, just like today, they were against the government secrecy on UFOs. So that's what got me started. And John Keel, he wrote several books before Mothman Prophecies. And I almost don't always recommend people jump right into prophecies because it's pretty heavy. I had read a bunch of his articles, but the one book that first kind of grabbed me was at that time was called Strange Creatures from Time and Space. It had this great Frank Frazetta painting on the cover. In more recent years, it's been retitled The Guide to Mysterious Beings. But that's where he first starts to talk about window areas. And, it's what we call the same thing as portals, or some people want to say a vortex or whatever. But he was trying to come to grips with, why is it that these things seem to sort of show up, scare the heck out of people, maybe even leave footprints, and then they're gone. And sometimes they're even seen around urban areas. And also the idea that, we were talking about earlier, the Skinwalker Ranch and Point Pleasant. All these are areas where all kinds of different phenomena seem to exist, which we don't normally think of as being connected, but somehow in these areas they are. So that was the one that first grabbed me. And then a few years later, he had written a book called Operation Trojan Horse about the same time, but I hadn't read it when it first came out. That's the book that really messed me up. This is where, and I kind of came kicking and screaming. You know how we oftentimes we have kind of an idea of what we want the explanation to be. It doesn't mean we're going to throw out objectivity, but even Jacques Vallée one time said that he would be kind of disappointed if the answer was simply extraterrestrial. It didn't mean that he was going to force his research in a certain direction, but I was very happy with little silver-suited men jumping out of egg-shaped craft, taking soil samples and so forth. That's before we got too much into the abduction scenario, but Keel demonstrated that all these things seem to be connected. UFOs, cryptids, psychic phenomena. And also he demonstrated that, I really think that Keel advanced the field maybe by a century. He found that certain individuals weren't only repeaters. They weren't only people that would perhaps see some kind of a strange light or object in the sky over and over again. They may also see some kind of a cryptid, some kind of an unexplained animal. And he had this great catchphrase. The catchphrase was, ask the contactee what they had for breakfast. Now, of course, he wasn't being literal about if they had sugar frosted flakes or not. He wanted to know, you should find out all about this person from the time they were young to the present, because he found out that these people were seeing, strange phenomena over and over again. They were having haunting phenomena in their house, electronic interference in their house with appliances, the telephone, and so forth. They might see apparitions, shadow people, and have abduction experiences. So, and I found that to be true as well. I mean, some of the people that I have talked to that have had missing time, if you ask the right questions, they've had an array of these experiences. So, and it does seem that certain people are kind of tuned in to this, and that's where Keel gets into the super spectrum. It's kind of about using it as kind of a literary device, where some people are just more sensitive to those invisible energies and have those experiences. I'm not one of them. I have had very little in the way of strange experiences. So I was pulled into this by a fascination, in trying to understand what's going on.
Wow.
I know I was
straight
rattling
off
on.
Straight off the back, we've gone deep into this rabbit hole already and proved your worth of telling me all about it, or telling us all about it, really, your knowledge. I read the book, as I say, about 5 years ago, of the Mothman Prophecies. I haven't read any of his other work. And I kind of regret doing that at this moment in time, delving down this rabbit hole that I'm down at the moment. And I remember one of the first things that I felt about John Keel was his ability to just write it as it happened. He didn't tell you what to think. He just wrote the account. And I remember reading probably about 3/4 of the book, thinking, well, this is just like account after account after account. And it was very, this person had this experience, this person had this experience. And he didn't tie it all together until more the end of the book. But when he first started, when he opens the book, he starts by saying how he broke down on a road.
Oh,
And
yes.
he goes to somebody's house and he's dressed in a suit with a rain mac on, and he asks to borrow their telephone and then disappears into the night again. And there was born a Man in Black encounter, a legend right there. So he is quite prosaic, isn't he? He's quite, he comes across in that book to me as somebody who's not given to flights of fantasy and is very aware of just detailing facts.
Yes, in fact, when he wrote that, he talks about how I love Colin Wilson, actually. There's a great book that Colin Wilson wrote called Alien Dawn, and he talks a lot about John Keel and Jacques Vallée and their research. He corresponded a lot with John Keel, and he wrote of John Keel, he said, John Keel is incapable of writing a dull sentence, and I think that's correct. But I thought perhaps John used that as a literary device, because these people, he knocks on the door and he's trying to get. You find out at first you don't know it's him, but you find that he's this bearded stranger in a dark suit, man in black, and it turns out these people perished on the bridge a couple weeks later. Well, it wasn't a literary device. I'm going to want to recommend, there are many anthologies out there now of collected articles from Keel from the past several decades before he died. And it's just, his thinking wasn't static, by the way. He just got into all kinds of things. But in the collection called The Great Phonograph in the Sky, there's a couple of interviews taken from different places. And in one of those interviews, he was asked about that. And he said, no, he had gone back there one time and he heard this rumor about these people that they had died on the bridge, and that they had this mysterious visitor. And of course, the mysterious visitor was just, as he said, a tired John Keel catching a whale of a cold. And so, a very mundane experience in a certain context blew up into something extraordinary, which it really wasn't at all.
That kind of demonstrates a lot of what we have to deal with, though, doesn't it?
Yes, we have to. It's very, very easy to take things at face value and not dig a little bit and think we found something miraculous, when actually it's not. It's just a guy breaking down in a car. I want to mention a couple things about the Mothman prophecies. It was several years after the events that he got that book published. I think he tried to interest some publishers early on, but they weren't interested. Finally, about 73 or 74, his editor or his publisher said, John, it's time to write a book about the Mothman prophecy. So he got out his briefcase and put together a bunch of material that he had and formulated a book. But then John calls them the faceless editors. They hacked out half his manuscript.
Oh.
And also I suspect a couple friends of mine had the pleasure, the Mothman Festival, which started around 2001. In 2003, John Keel visited there, and that's when they unveiled the majestic Mothman statue right in the heart of Point Pleasant. I wish to heck I'd been there. I never met John Keel, but yeah, it's really a great place to visit. The museum is well done. Jeff Wamsley co-created the festival, and also is the curator of the museum. But these guys, these friends of mine, had hours to talk to John Keel. So he found out all kinds of interesting things about him. One of the things was John would talk about how the editors screwed up his books a lot. And I think some of the so-called mistakes in the prophecies were probably editors tampering with it. But this is kind of going aside a little bit. Keel was actually he actually wrote scripts for Lost in Space under a different name.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I read when I was sort of reading up them before the show. He's sort of known for a bit of script writing and stuff.
Yep.
Before
Love that
his
show.
main
It's awesome.
career.
Well, he wrote one. I remember seeing this one as a kid, where the robot becomes giant, and the heroes are trapped inside it, going through all the mechanism, and there's 3 men in black, you can't see their faces, pursuing them inside the robot. So that's pretty much a Keel script, I think.
Right.
But he used to write ad libs for Merv Griffin, who was a talk show host here way back when. So he just had an amazing career in for Armed Forces Radio in Germany. So he was just really a phenomenal guy. But I think that the way the Mothman prophecies came together, by the way, that half manuscript that ended up on the floor, about 2/3 of that survived in another book that I recommend, The Eighth Tower. So it's not completely, he didn't resurrect all of the Mothman prophecies, but there's quite a bit of it there. And continues with some of the ideas. So I was electrified by the prophecies. I mean, by that time I knew who John Keel was, and I was a convert. I dumped the ET idea, and I was the guy that was right there in the bookstore waiting for that thing to come out. And I bought the first edition with the dust jacket and read it right away. And then a year later, I had to see what Point Pleasant looked like. So I took a journey down in 77, about June or July, and to see Point Pleasant for the first time. And back then the old North Power Plant was still standing where this thing was supposed to have been seen for the first time.
Yeah.
And so that was really that was very cool.
I can imagine it was actually, yeah, because having only seen it on like documentaries and stuff like that, to actually be there must be something completely a different vibe completely, because it's the atmosphere of a place, isn't it, as much as anything else.
Right, and the way that the way Keel describes the area and all these bizarre happenings that went on with it really are very difficult to explain in any context. Yeah, it's really it has quite, you've got the history of that part of West Virginia. You've got the terrain, the mountains, the confluence of rivers, the Ohio and the Kanawha. It's just a phenomenal area. You guys have got to make the journey someday to go to Point Pleasant, hopefully during the Mothman Festival, which they just canceled, by the way, this year again.
That's not hardly a surprise, really, under the circumstances. It's a shame, but it'll come back. Don't worry, everything will slowly get back to normal.
Yeah, but Kerry, I ain't getting any younger. They
We
gotta.
ain't burying you yet, Steve.
Yeah.
You got a lot of years left in you.
I hope so.
Can we talk about this creature? Because when I read that, it seemed very mechanical to me. It didn't. I mean, we talk about it, the Mothman, and I think people assume it's physical, like it is a physical thing, but a flesh and bones thing. But when I was reading that, it came across quite a mechanical thing to me. What was your take on the actual sighted Mothman?
Well, sometimes when I'm on these shows, somebody will ask me, "Well, what was the Mothman?" And I say, my catchphrase is, "It was a paradox," because it was about 6-7 feet tall, kind of humanoid-like, 8-10 foot wingspan, which probably isn't enough to keep something that size aloft. It wouldn't always flap its wings. It would put its wings behind it and take off straight like a helicopter. It also, in some cases, who was it? Carpenter, Connie Carpenter. She saw this thing by the Mason County Golf Course, and the next day she suffered conjunctivitis. The same thing that some people do with sunburn or close encounters with UFOs. That's when Keel writes in prophecies. He knew she had an experience. She was telling the truth because her eyes were all swollen. But you mentioned the mechanical part. Keel, I don't know if he mentions it in prophecies or not, but he does in other places. He got some reports where people had a close-up sighting of it, where they could hear something like a humming or something mechanical. And there was one of the last sightings in the this was in the, people actually lived in the TNT area at that time. At least a few people did. I think it was Mrs. Ralph Thomas. She saw this thing walking through the TNT. It wasn't flying, but it was walking, she said, jerkily like a robot. So, perhaps it was something like that. But on the other hand, sometimes it seems more like an apparition. So I don't. I don't know. I tend to think maybe it was paraphysical somehow, but it's just one of these things. I mean, Keel would have told you that he did not know for sure what the Mothman was. He used the term ultra-terrestrial and he used it as a literary device. He wrote later, and he borrowed the term from Ivan Sanderson. Ivan Sanderson, of course, was the great British naturalist transplanted to New Jersey. He's probably best known for The Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, but he wrote a couple phenomenal books on UFOs. And so Keel used the term because he had become disenchanted with the idea that these things were coming from off-world. He thought that perhaps they represented something natural to the planet that we just didn't understand. It was just it was a literary device. But I noticed in his writing sometimes when he would use elemental interchangeably with ultra-terrestrial. But of course, if you read prophecies, you know how he would talk about that. He thought that perhaps, and he develops this more in Trojan Horse. He thought that perhaps, and his thinking wasn't static and he wasn't dogmatic about it, but he thought perhaps the strange meandering lights were the only objectively real part of this, and people would be programmed. I mean, some people would see a giant triangle UFO. Some would see a creature walk off into the woods. And I love the term transmogrification. I mean, the only other place I've ever heard transmogrification are in Calvin and Hobbes comic strips. I don't know if you've ever encountered Calvin, but he would have his, he was like me as a kid. He was imagining he was Spaceman Spiff conquering the spaceways, and he would pull out his transmogrifier. So those are the only two people that talk about that word is Calvin and John Keel. But the idea was he thought these things were not illusions, but perhaps something temporarily real, paraphysical. And he wasn't concerned about so much about, well, did the object have landing pods? Did it have a dome? How many portholes? What did the creature look like? He thought perhaps, and he called it, he wanted to understand the cosmic mechanism behind all these things, because he thought perhaps a lot of these were simply a facade and not representing something objectively physical.
Did people report seeing the Mothman before or after experiencing something UFO related?
There was a couple of cases where the famous one with the famous one, and I can't remember her name now. It'll come to me. The lady that was carrying her infant child. They went to go to the TNT area to visit a friend, and they had heard about the Mothman, so they were going to go sneak up on the tap on the windows and try and scare the people in there, but they weren't home. So they were leaving, and they saw a strange light up in the sky when the Mothman, the thing kind of rose up out of the ground. I think there were one or two sightings where supposedly they saw the Mothman in conjunction with a light in the sky, but it wasn't necessary. That there were all kinds of strange lights and UFOs going overhead. And they would see them all during the night, all around the Ohio Valley. But that wasn't necessarily a direct connection. So some people wanted to say it was somehow it was an extraterrestrial being being let out by the UFO people, but I don't know. It may not be that simple to go A to B.
Yeah, I just wondered whether they were dropping him off or picking him up.
The Mothman prophecy seems to end, and it all sort of was culminating with the collapse of the bridge in
yes.
Point Pleasant. Do you subscribe to that idea, or does the phenomena cease at that point, or does it carry on afterwards?
Well, there were reports afterwards, and I guess they are occasionally throughout the years. But it seemed like the bulk of the all the phenomena, all the strange stuff going on were pretty much within that year, although not exclusively. A lot of people are very divided on it. Some people think that this entity caused the disaster. There's other people that think the Mothman was more of a harbinger, and that is more of a protector. Like Keel saw the kind of the resemblance to the Garuda out of Hindu mythology, and then, in fact, the original title for the Mothman prophecies, he wanted to call it the Year of the Garuda. But the problem I have with this, the harbinger idea is, don't you wish they were a little clearer about what disaster
That's
was?
what
Yeah.
and that's what I was thinking. Collapse of a bridge through a strange sort of winged humanoid. I can't make any connection.
Well, if he would have just tied a streamer behind him and say, "Stay off the bridge," we would have been much further ahead. But the thing is, the thing that gets really creepy is that the prophecies part of the Mothman prophecies, Keel was in contact with a lot of people that he called silent contactees, and these were people that firmly believed they were in contact with some kind of a intelligence, and they were getting messages, whether they were channeled messages or whatever. A lot of them felt they were really talking to a physical being, and they would get prophecies. And sometimes they would come true, and they would for a while, and then sometimes you'd get the big one where he talks about a guy who had been led along like this, and then all of a sudden he gets the big one where the world's going to end, but the Space Brothers are going to come down and pick up everybody on this hill, and of course they go to the hill, and the Space Brothers don't show up, but up until the toward the bridge collapse, he was hearing from different. These are different individuals that are getting messages, and they're all similar, and they're talking about this event, this EM effect that's going to happen on December 15th. And over time, more and more information comes out, and then it's going to happen. When President Johnson lights the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, and then there'll be 3 days of darkness. Was that the one where the Pope was going to be assassinated and so forth?
Yeah.
But there was something about a disaster on the Ohio River. Keel thought it was going to be a factory was going to blow up. But he told Mary Hyre. Now, Mary Hyre, of course, was the newspaper lady, the journalist that he became friends and a colleague with, and he told her, he said, "Don't tell anybody about this." He was afraid that if it came true, he'd be tagged as the guy that planted a bomb, if that's what it was. But and so you get it was like misdirection. It's like the idea. I'm sure you guys have talked about the idea of the trickster, and it's and Keel was actually, unlike the film. Keel was actually in his New York apartment, and he had bought this hook, line, and sinker. He admitted when Art Bell interviewed him when the film came out, he told Art Bell that he had gotten incredibly paranoid during this time. And if you remember, there's a chapter in there that says paranoiacs are made, not born. And but he's in his New York apartment with jugs of water, and he's waiting for the Christmas tree is lit, and then nothing happens. He thinks, well, they did it again. It's just nonsense. And then the news bulletin comes over the TV that the bridge between Gallipolis, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, West Virginia, had collapsed. And of course, 46 people lost their lives. It was December 15th, rush hour traffic, Christmas traffic. It was just after 5 o'clock. The sun was about down. It's 20 degrees, and people are plunging into this water. And so he was furious. He thought, it's like if Mothman was a harbinger, it didn't give us the information it needed. One other, I know I'm scattered and I go all over the place, but just an aside before I forget, there was another researcher that went in after Keel, a Swedish researcher whose name I don't recall. They became friends, and Keel even went over to Sweden and became really good friends with some of these people. But they found out, they interviewed several other Mothman witnesses, and most of them had experiences with poltergeist phenomena in their homes after they saw what they called the bird at the time.
Mm.
So, and sometimes people have that experience when they have a close encounter with a UFO. So, you wonder, it's these kind of things that kind of tend to break down the simple message that this is ET. They're coming in metallic spaceships. They're here to examine us, give us unscheduled medical examinations, and but there's so much more. There's just well, for lack of a better term, there's so much high strangeness associated with it. It's very difficult to try and figure out these things in a linear manner. And it's just we have to keep gathering information and look for the patterns and parallels that exist in these things. But anyway, I know I've gone off the track a little bit here, but.
No, because it is all part of it. This is the problem you have when you read through it. It becomes all part of it. You've got this strange Mothman kind of creature that people are citing. You then get into UFO sightings. People were seeing UFOs all over the place, weren't they? And having encounters on the road.
And there were some animal mutilations, cattle mutilations in the area.
Really?
That there was, yes. Keel talked, and also you have the Indrid cold phenomena.
Yeah.
Which
Right,
yes, and with. Kerry, when you were talking earlier, how you sounded like you were kind of befuddled. It's like you get to a certain point, and it's like you throw up your hands and wonder. And that's when I'm doing this stuff, my hands are perpetually thrown up, and that's why we have the cameras turned off now, so you can't see me looking like my hands are waving in the air. But that's what it is. And sometimes it's like you think you've got something, you find something, a pattern or a parallel, it's something that makes sense, and then it goes off the rails. It doesn't. Yeah. So, so I have to ask you, all of you. So, why do we do this? Why don't we pick up a Scrabble or something, or maybe gardening instead of pursuing this? Because it's circular. It's frustrating, but you just can't leave it. You just can't leave it alone.
Because it's the ultimate puzzle.
It is. It's the unknown, and we, as a human race, like to be in control or try to think we're in control.
Yes.
And having an unknown source out there, we some of us are intrigued to want to know what that is. And I know, like you've been talking about UFO sightings, the Mothman, poltergeist activity, and everything else that's encompassed in some of the reports. But I still feel that there are things that have happened that are quite coincidental as opposed to all connected. You get all these reports, and these UFO sightings might be completely disconnected to the Mothman sightings.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just like a needle in a haystack. I mean, these things are reported, and obviously you go and investigate, and it just all seems to be jumbled up in a big mess. All in a big ball.
And it is possible that sometimes we make connections that really aren't connected. The Men in Black phenomena, these Mary Hyre experienced some really creepy guys that came into her office and suggested she stop publishing UFO reports. Mm-hmm. Well, there was just this one little guy named Jack Brown, who was a real creepy little dude, and he may have just been that. He may have just this. Let's face it, this realm, some of these conventions do attract some people that are.
We
Yeah.
know what you're going to say. Yeah.
I mean,
it's as if.
Well, it's the same over in the UK. You've got, for example, Borley. It's supposed to be a very haunted place. Paranormal investigators just turn up, and the local residents, and there's only probably a handful of them, they really dislike and discourage people from going. And you could quite easily turn that around into a conspiracy theory to say, well, because they don't want people there, is there a reason? Are they doing something that's creating this activity? But I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah, because you don't know, because this whole sort of Point Pleasant thing, I mean, we could be confronted with the cosmic joker who just says, right, you lot, try and work this out.
That's probably where he lives.
Yeah.
His holiday home on Earth.
Well,
Yeah.
there is that undercurrent of the trickster that
Yeah.
that Carl Jung talked about, and the Native American traditions have, and so forth. And if there is something to that, that tends to suggest to me that there is an element of human consciousness involved. In other words, it's like I love the the film Forbidden Planet, and the MacGuffin was this ancient race that became extinct, and they found out that they had created these machines that where they could project their thoughts, but of course they forgot the monsters from the id, their own inner subconscious. In other words, Freud's id, and it's almost like there's that mechanism working in part of it, and that's really, you mentioned the Skinwalker Ranch, and I don't know if you guys have read The Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp and Colin Kelleher.
No.
That's the book. That's the book I recommend. That was the one when Bigelow, he bought the ranch from the Shermans.
Yes.
The Shermans were high-end cattle ranchers. They bought it, I think, in the early '90s, and it was just an array of bizarre phenomena. And Bigelow came in, the billionaire, set up the National Institute for Discovery Science, and so it was Colin Kelleher was one of the scientists that co-wrote the book with George Knapp. George Knapp is a sometime host on Coast to Coast AM, and he's a investigative reporter out of Las Vegas. Well, that really is a pretty good. A lot of people are suspicious of the reality show because they're suspicious of reality TV. But I would say go to this book, and the thing is that if you pick and choose some of the phenomena that happened, you could say, well, this is ET, or they're interdimensional beings coming through portals or whatever. But if you look at the whole array, you get into something like Point Pleasant. You have disembodied voices overhead, sometimes speaking in strange languages. You get just all kinds of. You had the one guy that showed up early on when the Shermans still had the ranch. There had been some articles about it, so he wanted to come to the ranch and he wanted to meditate because he felt he was drawn there. Well, he started doing that, and something came out of the woods sounding very angry, and it had kind of that shimmer or predator effect, which it shows up now and then in Bigfoot reports and other areas, and it scared the crap out of this guy, and he got the hell out of there. But they're just so, and then there's the bizarre cattle mutilations that happened right over a rise one time when they were the dog took off, and they go over this rise and they find this newborn calf next to the mother, as rib cage has been completely ripped open and it's bloodless, and the next day they're tracking some kind of bizarre creatures in the snow in the night that left one footprint. Sherman's sure he hit it a couple times with his rifle, and also, there's just so many things. They had the cameras that they had observing the area. The wires were ripped out simultaneously in 3 cameras, but the other camera that was still working couldn't see anything from its perspective. And also, Colin Kelleher said that they documented something like I don't know, 200 separate paranormal events, and virtually none of them were repeated. So here they're trying to apply the scientific method to something that perhaps just doesn't work. So my point is that I think there are some clues in this, that there seems to be a component with human consciousness connected with this. And perhaps we even co-create some of this phenomena, both whatever the mechanism is and something within us. So it's again, that's another one of those things where you just kind of go off the cliff, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense.
That's exactly it, because you come up with like a theory, whatever direction you come at it from, whether it be a psychological or a, cryptid or whatever, you come up with a theory, but then something else happens in these places that doesn't fit the theory.
Well, let me give you. I just thought of there was a famous incident that happened on the ranch. Well, the bulls, they had about 5 or 6 of these Angus bulls, and they were absolutely. I mean, here they're high-end cattle ranchers. They're losing cattle. Sometimes they find the footprints running into the snow, and then there's nothing there. Sometimes they just disappear. Sometimes they find them mutilated. They're at their wits' end because they're having poltergeist phenomena. Their objects are being displaced in the house, and the Sherman, his post hole digger, was right behind him. He turns around to get it, and it's gone. He accused his kids of playing a prank, but then they find it 2 weeks later, way up in the trees. So anyway, he and his wife Gwen, they had done some work on the ranch. They're coming back, and Gwen says, "I don't know what I'll do if anything happened to those bulls." Well, that's the wrong thing to say to the trickster, because they got to the pen and they're gone. The pen is locked up. They can't find the bulls, and they're frantic, looking around. They don't see any tracks, and there's this white old trailer that they've never used from the previous owners, and he happens to look inside because he hears something, and the bulls are crammed in there. They're alive, but it's like they're in a stupor. So he starts banging on the door. They wake up, and they completely rip the thing apart, busting their way out, and it takes hours for them to gather them up. Well, there's other incidents like that where you have displaced livestock. There's a fascinating book by Randall Pugh and Ted Holliday. Ted Holliday was the guy that investigated the Loch Ness Monster for several decades. And it was called the Dubbed Enigma. And it was a 3-ring circus of the paranormal in southwest Wales in '77. Tall, silver-suited giants, little men looking kind of like leprechauns, egg-shaped craft, strange lights, and so forth. Well, the Ripperston Farm, they were cattle ranchers, and they had 100 cattle locked up in a pen. They had the deadbolt. They had it wrapped in case the cattle moved against it and opened the door. The next day, 100 cattle are gone, and they find them a half mile away at the Broadmoor farm. Now, some people said, well, that it was a prank. Some people let the cows out and shut the gate again, and the trouble is the cows have to go past the window where they sleep. Okay, so they're sound sleepers. They get to the Broadmoor farm, but they would have to have been led over there because you have to take a 90-degree angle, and cattle usually don't think that far ahead, as far as we know. And so, okay, it might have been a prank. A few days later, Billy Coombs is taking 16 of the cattle out, puts them in a pen, separate pen. He goes into the barn, turns on the milk machines, turns around, comes back, and they're gone. And they find them at the Broadmoor farm. Okay, now one more example. You're familiar with Alan Godfrey, the classic abduction case in Todd Morton, England. He was on my show. And before his abduction experience, that's what got him out in this area. These people were calling saying that they're finding these cows in this gated area. They're trying to figure out how the heck there's no way they could get there. I mean, the gates are locked and so forth. And the one elderly lady that talked to him, she said, "I may be old, but I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." And she had seen some kind of a strange light. Well, that, of course, he had the abduction experience. He had the missing time, and he pursued that. But again, it gets the whole thing triggered with displaced cattle. And what? Oh, by the way, I should say that Pugh and Holliday, when they wrote the Dubbed Enigma, they found all kinds of connections with folklore, which of course is Jacques Vallée with Passport to Magonia. He's kind of the guy that pioneered that. Well, they weren't being dogmatic, and they weren't necessarily trying to explain everything, but they found in there's several traditions, including a Norwegian tradition about the milkmaid that put her cow in the little holding area. She's going to milk it. And then she goes back and it's gone. And she does this several times. And then, according to the tradition, the folklore, the elemental comes to her and says, you can't put your cow there because it's spoiling our food. So they're on the speculation train. They wonder, well, perhaps these entities derive their so-called food from earth energies. Perhaps the proximity of livestock interrupts that somehow. But the thing is, here Gwen Sherman said, I hope nothing ever happens to those bulls. And it's almost like somebody heard her and said, well, I'll fix you. We're going to put them in this trailer and just freak you out. So it's another one of these. I can't help but look for patterns. I mean, they're there. You don't have to make them. But that's the thing that is so fascinating, is that you find these patterns and parallels in all different ways, which tend. Another thing it tells us is that there's something real going on here. People aren't just making up stories or imagining things. Of course, they do that sometimes, but when you find these patterns, that's valuable. That at least gets us, some answers.
Does it give us the why?
Well,
why? What cows?
Well,
I mean,
I know.
They're quite stupid animals. They're very, they're herd animals.
Well,
They
no
behave in
milk for
weird
you.
ways. You can't. I know. So
Well, Kerry, if they could talk, they'd probably say, well, at least we weren't mutilated. We're still alive. All they did is shuffle us around a little bit.
I know, but even take that one thing, cattle mutilation, which we've talked about before on the show. There's two schools of thoughts. There's people that have looked at them and gone, there is nothing actually unusual about this. This is just a hype thing. And you've got other people that are swear buying it and saying this definitely happened. We've got it recorded. You don't know where you stand with a lot of it, because you can find two schools of thought on all sorts of things, can't you?
Yes. And
have you seen a cattle mutilation in the flesh yourself?
No, I don't know that I have the stomach for that. No pun intended. I've seen photographs, and there's a book, an early book that came out in the 70s called Mystery Stalks the Prairie, that has color photographs of some of the. This is back when it was first coming to attention, and it was probably around the time that Linda Moulton Howe was doing her documentary on what was it called, Strange Harvest or something like that.
Strange Harvest. Yeah.
Okay. So that's. I mean, it's so gruesome, and it's tough enough to read the descriptions of the surgical precision, the lack of blood, and so forth, and the types of organs that are consistently harvested. And I have tried to wrap my head around this and try to imagine why. I mean, some people think, well, it's a military operation, and by harvesting certain organizations, they can determine changes in the atmosphere or whatever. But good Lord, why didn't they just the military have their own little farm? And why would they go in under cover of darkness into private property and do that?
We kill enough cows ourselves as humans to be able to take those organs and do those kind of tests on a daily basis. I mean, thousands of cattle get killed daily for our meat. That's the bottom line of this. We would have no need for a government organisation. This is the rational in my head speaking. There'd be no need for a secret government, experimentation to do this. They could just, like you say, have their own cattle or go to the nearest abattoir and collect the organs they want.
I think for me, I quite think that, especially in the case of the mutilated cow, whatever, with no blood, nothing under it either, it was definitely mutilated by something or someone and put there after its mutilation. That's how I think about that. And by doing that, they're just feeding the legend.
Well, perhaps, but and if you go out on a limb and say, well, it's the aliens, it's the others amongst us, or whatever. Why? I mean, what possible purpose? In the Mothman prophecies, he talks about a woman, he calls her Mrs. Bryant, and she lived across the river from Point Pleasant in Gallipolis, Ohio. And she was having all kinds of bizarre things going on her farm. Her son was seeing these large, low-flying, sort of like boxcar UFOs, very quiet, going over the property. They had classic haunting phenomena going on in the house. She's the one that saw a couple of entities that looked kind of like Indrid Cold types. She was in coming home from work or getting out of her place of employment, going to the parking lot. She sees one of these elongated ships similar to what Indrid Cold is supposed to have traveled in, according to Woodrow Derenberger, a little bit before. And she sees these guys dressed in black, and they're kind of got the arms crossed and the grin, and they have a point. So many of these entities, these contacts, have pointless conversations, and it just or something very mundane. And then she sees them the next day in civilian clothes, and they nod at her like, "Hi, we remember us?" And this poor lady's freaking out. Well, she had cattle mutilations on her property. She claimed that she saw a couple of the perpetrators dressed in white coveralls, and when she went after them, they leaped over fences. There's very seldom do you get any any report where somebody is supposed to have seen the perpetrator. So again, I know we overuse going down the rabbit hole, but how else are you going to explain it? And it's just bizarre. There was, and she, she asked Keel. I mean, she was very nervous about talking to him because she had gone to the local police and they just laughed at her. And she asked about Woodrow Derenberger. She said, "Did he ever see that man again?" And Keel said, "Well, he said he did." And that's when she told him about seeing them in town, and that was really threw her for a loop. So there were a few people that saw sort of of course, if people don't know, the original contact, if you will, was on Route 77. This was actually a little before the Mothman showed up, maybe a few days. And Woodrow Derenberger was I think a sewing machine salesman. He's driving down at night. This thing sort of like it looked like a sort of a chimney from a kerosene lamp, if you were to lay it on the side. And it pulled over and kind of stopped him on the highway. And this gentleman with the grin and the folded arms didn't tell him he was Indrid Cold at the time, but he had this really, and not a conversation that you would think you would have from a man from another planet. And and then he left him and said, "I'll contact you again." And he supposedly, now some of the Derenberger stuff does, it was suggested that later on he was embellishing some of it, but it seemed like Keel felt that his initial contact was something real. And supposedly some people saw him talking to this man and actually saw the craft. But it's the whole contactee thing is very, very strange. And when I say contactee, I'm differentiating between the classic contactees and what we think of as abduction experiences. Obviously, one is you're not invited, you're taken, and the other one you're supposed to have been invited. But and that's another thing that when you get into some of these contacts, some of the classic ones like George Adamski and George Van Tassel and so forth, there are some elements that certainly seem to be fraudulent. But then there are other elements that seem to have some legitimacy. The Surreyton mystery, where Arthur Bryant is supposed to have met some Venusians, and one of them was thought to be the reincarnation of George Adamski after he died. Do you know that story?
No.
Okay, well, that one I won't get into it. I mean, it's crazy. Some of it was obvious fraud, but a lot of people seemed to be having real experiences where they would see some kind of a light or craft that get a message. There were voices imprinted on tape and so forth. But the initial experience that Bryant described, really, if you examine it, it really falls apart. It's just a wild tale. But that's why it's so hard. You want things to be explained, okay, this is a hoax. But then you find, well, there's certain elements that are certainly have to be a hoax, and then there's other elements that seem to have some substance to them. And then, you just throw up your hands again, trying to think, what can I possibly think about this?
Mm. Well, on that note, we're coming to the end of the first half of the show, believe it or not. And I think you're all out there who are listening, starting to understand why this is one of the most baffling areas that you can probably look into when you look into the paranormal field. These kind of areas are throw your hands up in the air scenario.
Just like you don't care.
Exactly, because not one size fits all. When we come back after this break, we are going to delve a little bit deeper into this high strangeness world and try. I don't think we'll do it, but try and make some sense of it all, I suppose. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK radio network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Now, in the first half of the show, oh gosh, where do we go from there? It's an absolutely fascinating area of high strangeness we're looking at tonight, leading on from the vortexes and portals show that we discussed last week. And we have the amazing Mr. Steve Ward. I'm going to call it him again, the amazing Mr. Steve Ward, who is a lot more versed in this than we are. And we're just outside looking in on cases that have been well researched beyond our own capabilities. And Mr. Steve Ward is one of those gentlemen, and he's kindly trying to help us unravel. But I feel like I'm going deeper and deeper down a rabbit hole, Steve.
Well, the truth is, I don't know what the hell's going on either. So, perhaps it's the blind leading the blind here. But it's, I think, in the old days, when you looked at UFOs as aliens in nuts and bolts craft, and Bigfoot was just an unknown creature, and ghosts were something separate, it was so much easier. But when you start to delve into it and you start to see that the same people are having all these different kinds of experiences, that there are amazing patterns that show up, even in channeling messages, which some are very suspect, but some perhaps are coming from an unknown source, and if you analyze some of the messages from it over different generations and from different groups of people, sometimes you get the same names, the same entities show up, supposedly, and some of the same messages that come through, like the good guys are from the Pleiades, the bad guys are from the Orion group, and Ashtar gets a lot of, not FaceTime because we don't know what his face looks like, but he shows up all the time. So it's just I always find it fascinating when we get these parallels. And we mentioned off air a little bit, but there's a fascinating case that it's about Joe Symington. He was about 1961, I think, in Eagle River, Wisconsin. And Joe is a plumber by trade and a chicken farmer by day. And he's finishing up his late breakfast dishes, and he hears this incredible racket. He said it was like knobby tires on a pavement. And he looks outside and he sees this metallic looking craft. It looks like chrome, and it's classic. It's got like two plates together on top of each other, but there's a door in it. And he steps outside and he looks, and he can see inside the craft there are human looking people inside. Doesn't seem to be too threatening. And he approaches, and he sees 3 or 4 people inside. They're about 5 feet tall. They're wearing some kind of coverall and some kind of a cap. And one of them hands him a bowl or a chalice or something like that looks like it's made of the same material of this craft. And they indicate through sign language, not telepathy or speech, that they would like water. So he goes to his well. It sounds like the old, in an old fairy trick, really. He goes to the well. He fills up the jug or whatever it is and hands it back. Behind this guy is another one of his crew that looks like he's cooking something on a flameless grill. Okay, so we're going to assume this is a scout ship from the mothership. And it's cramped with these guys in there. Why the hell are they using up all this space for cooking? I mean, haven't these guys discovered freeze-dried food? And and didn't the astronauts use Tang? I mean, but of course, and then why on earth do they need water from an external source? Is this for drinking? Is it for analysis? I don't know. But in exchange for the water, they give Joe what he calls 3 pancakes, and which, by the way, they taste terrible because he checked them out. So it's like, again, it's almost like the food from Fairyland. So, right, the incident is relatively short. They take off. Joe reports it. Project Blue Book gets involved. Dr. Hynek gets involved. They actually take taxpayers' money to analyze the pancakes. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. So there's a local judge there that knows Joe. And by the way, everybody believes Joe is telling the truth as he knows it. They think that, well, Joe just fell asleep and had a dream. I don't know how he dreamed up the pancakes, but the judge, he actually wrote an article in one of these magazines at the time. He interviews Joe, and the first thing he asked, he said, a little tongue-in-cheek, he says, well, Joe, what do these guys look like? Little green men? And Joe says, no, Judge. They were kind of swarthy looking, like Italians. Okay, so are we going to assume that Italy had a secret space program? Probably not. Well, let's carry that a little bit. John Keel in Trojan Horse writes about a General Spaatz, World War II. In about 48, he had given a press conference. And part of that press conference, he says something, I don't know if he was kidding or what, but he said there's no truth to the rumor that Spaniards are driving flying saucers or that they're coming from Spain. Keel thought that perhaps actually Keel was getting some of the experiences he was getting from people. They saw sometimes very human-looking people, and sometimes they were not terribly sophisticated in their description, because these are often Americans saying things like, well, they look kind of like dark foreign types, or they look kind of European. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, are any of you guys sinister dark European types? I can't tell from here. Probably not.
I've dated a few.
But the point is that they've got kind of this general description, which kind of flows into some of the Men in Black lore as well. So that was kind of interesting. And then you look at the way in which they obtained the water. Again, maybe maybe this wasn't a real experience. Maybe it was something that was projected or whatever. But I don't think Joe just made it up or dreamed it up. I think it was something external to him. 100 or 200 years earlier, they would have said Joe was visited by the fairies, even though they showed up in this metallic chariot. So there are other cases where we see craft supposedly collecting water. There's a famous case in Ontario where these little guys are on top of this ship that's floating on the water. They put in this green hose and they suck the water out. Ingo Swann talks about going to some remote area, probably up in Canada. He didn't actually know where they see this triangle craft go over a lake and literally suck water up inside it. But very strange, where they just say, here, fill up this bucket. Well, there is a case like that, a little bit. In California, mid-50s, there are 2 miners. One is named John Black, and they have been working for about a month out in the middle of nowhere and doing their job. And they keep seeing a strange craft going overhead occasionally. And they they think maybe it's military. They don't know what it is. Well, at some point, John Black is in the woods and he sees what he thinks is a little boy fishing by the stream. He looks closer and it's not a little boy. It's some kind of an entity who is retrieving water in a bucket. And this guy is wearing a suit that it sort of has buckles on it, sort of like a leprechaun. And so he stays back. He follows this entity outside the woods, goes through a clearing, comes up to one of these metallic crafts that they've been seeing for the past month, walks up the ladder and takes his bucket of water in the UFO. So, I don't know what to make of that, but let's go back to the analyzing the pancakes. Jacques Vallée, who wrote Passport to Magonia. Now, this was his third major UFO book. The first two were Challenge to Science and Anatomy of a Phenomenon. And then he was taking a very, very hardcore nuts and bolts approach to the UFO problem. But then he wrote Passport to Magonia, and he starts out by saying, look, this is not a scientific book. You can almost see these guys coming to a certain point where they are throwing up their hands and saying, this is not working, so let's try something else. So he quotes extensively from Evans Wentz. He was a theosophist who wrote the book, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, about 1911. He went around collecting reports from people that had encounters with the fairies, with the elementals, one-on-one real-time encounters, not stuff handed down from previous generations. And he was told by an Irishman, it told him that the fairies eat fresh meat, drink pure water, and they never take salt. Guess what was missing in the cosmic pancakes from outer space? There was no sodium. Now, that might not mean anything, but it's very intriguing anyway. So the point is with the Symington encounter, you take this one bizarre experience, and it's funny, you can see this guy on the old YouTube videos where he's this crusty old guy, and he tells his story straightforward. And they even asked him, he said, Joe, would you ever go for a ride on this? And he said, no, the food is terrible. So it sounds like a punchline, but it's just what he said. So these are the kind of things that fascinate me. And in the old days when you would see this thing reported, you wouldn't get into all the patterns that show up. That sometimes they weren't apparent, but it's when you analyze these things with a certain eye, I think it at least does, it uncovers some of the mystery. But still, early on, Kerry, you said, well, why? Well, still, we don't really have the why. I mean, there's so many of these encounters just seem to be pointless.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Now, you've referenced a lot in America, a lot of cases in America.
Yes.
Is it predominant? Is it only in America? Do these areas of high strangeness only happen in America?
I wouldn't say so. We don't get there's all kinds of activity that goes on in South America, for example, that we don't hear about up here much. There's one thing I thought of in Romania. There's that area of forest that is where nothing grows, and they see strange lights and so forth. I think that easily qualifies as one of these areas. And I'm sure there's something called the M triangle in the Ukraine, I think, that has all kinds of things going on. So I would say no, but I don't think we have a lot of information on some of the ones outside of America.
I will say this, Europe does seem to be almost like a black zone. You don't get a lot of information out of it.
What about Cannock Chase, that area? Would that qualify, do you think, as a...
That's UK.
Yeah, okay.
It? Yeah, I'm not including UK and Europe.
Oh, okay, all right.
That's about 10, 15 minutes away from me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Paul doesn't live far from there. But from like Europe, as in like France, Spain, Italy, Russia, all those sort of the whole bulk of that area. You get the odd case, but you don't get. And it is the odd case, isn't it?
There were in Challenge to Science, Valet talked about there was a couple waves of humanoid reports in France, and they were very much small humanoids, not necessarily, large heads or something looking very strange, silver suits, egg-shaped craft. So you did get waves of that. But yeah, I can't think of on the continent of too many areas that we would call, describe as high strangeness areas. Although some areas, I mean, there's a lot of history there. I'm sure that there are many hauntings that go back a long ways, and there's a lot of activity in that respect.
You would think, but generally you hear from America and England and maybe a little in Australia, but not so much in that area. I'm not including the other continents, obviously, in that, because, they have their own mythologies and cultural perspectives on things. So let's talk Loch Ness.
Okay. You want me to start?
Yeah, you can do.
Okay.
I mean, I know my thoughts on it. I think it's a load of bunkum, but again, a whole mythology. Sorry, I know that's not me. But a whole thing has built up around that, because you tie it in with Aleister Crowley and Boleskine House. You tie it in with so many other strange phenomena when you read into that in that area. Now, is that a marketing hype for the tourist industry that is now built up around that particular crypto?
You know what, Kerry? That is that qualifies as a high strangeness area, Loch Ness. I actually don't think it's bunk, but I also don't think we're dealing with a flesh and blood. It's certainly not a plesiosaur. That's been debunked. But the journey of Ted Holliday, F.W. Holliday, is fascinating to me, and he's another one that corresponded with John Keel, and it was Colin Wilson that was instrumental in getting his third book out, called The Goblin Universe, after his death. Wilson was a great champion of people like Lethbridge, T.C. Lethbridge.
Yeah, I love Colin Wilson. Yeah, he's one of my faves.
And yes, fascinating guy. And as a matter of fact, there's a chapter in one of Wilson's books, this huge book called Mysteries. There's a chapter where he talks about the research of John Keel, Lethbridge, Holliday, and a couple other people, and kind of ties it all together. It's really fascinating. But the Holliday was an angler. He was a fisherman, and that's why he was at Loch Ness. And of course, things really started hopping when they completed the road between, I think, Foyers and Inverness back in 33, 34. And Holliday actually saw this thing a couple times, and it was immediately he knew it wasn't a plesiosaur. And besides, they're air breathers. We would have a lot more sightings if, in fact, a plesiosaur somehow survived through the millions of years and the frigid temperatures of Loch Ness. But he thought it was perhaps some kind of an oversized mollusk. And because of the sightings, there were even some incredible land sightings where it would scoot across the road, looking almost like a giant worm. In his first book, called The Great Orm, O-R-M, of Loch Ness, and of course, orm is just an ancient word for worm. But then he found, the more research he got, he found out Loch Ness, for one thing, is a UFO hotspot. He'd seen a couple himself. There was a strange incident where a Swedish researcher named Jan Sundberg was in the Foyers area. He got turned around, lost temporarily in the woods. He comes to a clearing. He sees this craft, which at first he thinks is some kind of submersible, and he sees these three characters that looks like they're in diving suits, but he notices something's not quite right. They get into this thing and they take off straight up in the air and then angles off into the sky. And there were there's other phenomena that would occur at Loch Ness. He would have they would get these neuralgia pains when he was investigating the Loch Ness monster, and even in some of these other lakes, he was getting this kind of bizarre. Maybe it was psychosomatic. I don't know, but so there's a lot of the Aleister Crowley stuff. I think is kind of I would go with Bunko on that, but he was finding out there was a lot of strange stuff going on, and then he heard about there's all kinds of sort of Nessie-like creatures, or the water horse, if you will, in other lakes in Ireland and Scotland. There's of course Morag and Morar, but the thing is there were some really classic sightings in some of the lakes in Ireland. And very credible sightings, one after another, some even on land. But the problem is that some of these lakes are maybe the size of a football field and maybe 20 feet deep. You're not going to have any kind of a fish population to feed one of these things, much less a colony. So you have the paradox, like the Mothman. You have people that see this thing, credible people experience it, but it can't be. It doesn't flap its wings. These creatures don't, how can they possibly live in these small lakes? So we talked a little bit about ritual off air. There's this bizarre incident where, this gets into Dr. Donald Oman, who was an Anglican exorcist, and that's a long story there, but he decided that he was going to exorcise the beastie out of Loch Ness. And so Holiday went along for the ride, and they went to the four corners of the loch and did the ceremony. And they went to the center of the loch and did the ritual. And what they had done, they had borrowed a boat from Mr. and Mrs. Kerry. Mr. Kerry was, I think, a retired RAF officer, and they lived on the shores of Loch Ness. And they allowed them to borrow their boat, not a big yacht or anything. And even the BBC got involved in this for laughs, I guess. And they covered some of this. So they go through this ritual and they come back. Holiday's exhausted. Whatever was going on, he felt like something was really going on, at least in consciousness. So he gets back. He's in the front room with Mr. and Mrs. Kerry. All of a sudden, they hear this. Mrs. Kerry and Holiday hear this horrible racket. They look out. They see something like a tornado or a funnel cloud, and it's thundering. It just makes this horrible noise. Mrs. Kerry sees a beam of light come through the window, strike Holiday in the forehead, right where the holy water is supposed to have been placed by Dr. Donald Oman. Mr. Kerry has got his back to them, and he doesn't hear, see, feel anything. Of course, he's mixing a drink, so there's no record of how many drinks he had, that perhaps he was insulated from all this anyway. Maybe he had the best idea. So, and then everything stops, and there's no disturbance outside. There was no real wind or anything like that, and they have no clue as to what happened. And so the next day, Holiday gets up. He's kind of reflecting on, this bizarre journey he's been on, from thinking it's some kind of a mollusk to thinking he was heavily influenced by Carl Jung. He began to believe that it was more of a ghost or a projection. It wasn't really a solid being, a creature. And that's kind of where I am. But anyway, so he's on the shore there, and he looks over and he sees a man in black. Now, this guy, it's almost like he doesn't see any detail. It's almost like one of those, I don't know if you have them over there, where they have these two-dimensional black silhouettes of people standing by the side of the road. You pass by their house. It just didn't look like there was much detail there. But he felt something negative about it. So, and he just does a double take. He wonders, okay, am I seeing things? Is this the residual of what happened yesterday? So he's walking up to it. He's going to reach out and touch it to see if it's real, but he hears a pop and it's gone. 1 year later, almost exactly 1 year later, he has a heart attack near that same spot. And he realizes that as they're carrying him to the ambulance, they're carrying him right over that spot where he saw this apparition. Now, here's something else. I know we're really we're so far down beyond the rabbit hole. We're probably in the center of the earth now. But it was interesting because Jim Mars, who was the writer, he would talk about. Well, he wrote a book called Sci Spies, where he talked about the U.S. military remote viewing program. And the military remote viewers sometimes, I mean, obviously they're looking for bad guys and commies and all that sort of thing. But every once in a while, they would throw in a red herring, something completely unexpected as a blind target, something to do with UFOs or whatever. Well, one of them was the Loch Ness Monster. And they were seeing something that looked kind of like a plesiosaur. It seemed to be solid. It would leave a wake. But then when they tried to tap into where it came from or its origin, it would disappear. They couldn't find anything. So take that for what it's worth. But I recommend the second book that Holliday wrote was called The Dragon and the Disc. And he gets into the old carvings of sort of the serpent and the disc. He calls it the disc culture. He talks about all the high strangeness around the loch and some of his experiences. And in the Goblin universe, he gets into the exorcism and the things that happened there. Also, there's a couple of books written about Dr. Almond. Dr. Donald Ormond saw a Nessie-like creature in Loch Long several years before, the two humps. And he told this to our Norwegian sea captain. And the Norwegian sea captain said, "You've got to come with me to the Fjord of Trolls." And he wanted him to exercise this area. So they go to the Fjord of Trolls and they see another one of these two-humped creatures coming at them. And the captain said, "Don't worry, they never connect with you." But he believed there was something negative or evil about them in a spiritual sense. So that was Almond wrote about that in his book on exorcism, about that he thought perhaps Nessie wasn't a real flesh and blood creature. Holliday saw that and he contacted him, and that's how they got together. And it's whether it's legit or not, whether you believe it or not, it's just a fascinating area to go through all that. I definitely recommend checking out some of Holliday's books anyway.
Oh, wow. Maybe there is a little bit more to Loch Ness than I anticipated.
Yes, but I don't. I think you're right. It doesn't. It's another one of those things where it just simply doesn't fit as a flesh and blood creature. It's certainly in the other lakes, and there's and these things are as common as the myth of the water horse was. I mean, those guys were everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's I think perhaps it is something more of a, I don't know, a thought projection or something, but it's something natural to the earth, something that we just don't quite have a grasp on.
It's a giant seahorse. That's what it is, really.
Well, we can't go much further in talking about high strangeness with a case that's currently being followed, shall we say, through, and it ties in a lot of these kind of cases that we've discussed tonight, which is, and I'm sure you're not a stranger to this, Steve. It's Hellier. Have you watched Hellier?
Yes.
And what do you make of that? Because they talk about a lot of these terms, and they're coming across strange creatures. That's where it all started, and it's bringing a lot of this trickster kind of scenario in, and ritual, and ufology, and strange occurrences. What do you make of that series?
It's hard to know. They started out the strange creatures were kind of related to the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, the classic case in the mid-50s where it was in Sutton, I guess it was the Sutton family, was it? I mean, it was classic. They saw one of them went out to the well and saw the light land behind the hill, and next thing you know, they're inundated with these little critters that when they shoot them, they just kind of roll up in a ball and walk away. I saw something, I think it might have been a documentary on it, where they interviewed in recent years one of the kids had grown up, and he said that, oh yeah, it all happened. these things were peering from the roof and looking through windows and so forth. And this guy had gone to church every week of his life after that point, after he had that bizarre experience. So it affected him that much. So the Hellier, they get that message. I tend to think that the original message, and I could be wrong, was a hoax. Somebody was messing with them. They mentioned the name, this Terry Wrist, and that connects with Indrid Cold. And I don't know. There's I think some of the things may not be synchronistic. Maybe they're coincidence. I don't know, but it's a good. It's kind of what happened to John Keel. When you get into these things, they kind of take over, and it's almost like the phenomena shapes itself around you, and you start. I don't know. I don't know how much substance the original letter or claim, because they could never really track down. They could never really find that guy or the house for sure. But yeah, it's very creepy. It led them on a long road, and I've seen the part 2 as well.
Yeah.
And so I just don't know what to make of it. But it's I can see how they got caught up in it, and I would have too.
I would have been all over it myself. And in regards to getting caught up into it, you are caught up in it when you read the book, The Mothman Prophecies. When you any book that's dealing with this kind of phenomena. I'm exploring the Skinwalker Ranch. You get caught up in it. Hellier, you get caught up in it yourself, just as a bystander, as just watching somebody else go through that journey, or and that's the thing with it. No one answer, no one formula fits the phenomena. And when you look at these cases, even as a bystander, reading the book, watching a documentary, whatever format that takes for you, it is one of those where you come away with no answers.
Right, and it's just it's compounded to the answers are less and less, and everything's more mystifying. At the end of the first documentary, they call a man named John Tenney. Well, I know John, and he's the one that's recommending to them that you get into these things and you just got to kind of stop and kind of take stock, and there just aren't answers sometimes, and John was on one of those ghost hunting shows with, I think, Amy Bruni and Chip Coffey, and they got into a situation where they didn't know what this thing was. Some thought it was a demon, some thought it was whatever. John called it a egregore. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a kind of like a thought form. It's kind of like something that forms and shapes to fit the belief system of the people there.
Yes.
And John Keel talked about paranormal mimicry, and he the one thing he said about the film that they got right on was the paranoia that he felt. And it's almost like the phenomena was shaping itself to mess with him. He goes to a motel and there's messages there for him. Now, let's be clear that some of the stuff that happened to John Keel was certainly human intervention. And the reason I say that is that in one of his interviews, he reveals that he had written a critical article on the FBI when J. Edgar Hoover was in charge. 2 weeks later, a lot of the harassment you hear about in the Mothman prophecies, like his telephone being messed with, the IRS coming after him. That wasn't Indrid Cold messing with him. That was just probably J. Edgar having a little fun with John. But
but certainly me kind of thing.
But that's another thing. Sometimes even Betty and Barney Hill, the classic abductees from the 60s, the stuff that happened to them afterwards was stranger than the original abduction, and some of that was government intervention. They were monitoring them and so forth. Some of it seemed to be something else. So with the Hellier, you really get caught up in it, and you feel like they don't know. I don't. One thing I don't believe is the Indrid Cold stuff. I don't think that. I think that part, not they, and certainly not they were hoaxing. I think somebody else was hoaxing the Indrid Cold stuff, where they they used that cipher.
That's right.
Yep, and which is very interesting. Alan Greenfield wrote the secret cipher of the Euphonauts and the secret rituals of the Men in Black, and I just don't think that was it Terry Wrist claimed that he actually discovered and found where Indrid Cold. I'm not sure that Indrid Cold is a flesh and blood person. I don't know. That's another. That is such a mess, because even Keel said, you have Widow Derenberger's initial experience, and then later on you've got this Indrid and his buddies coming to his house in a VW, and you're wondering. So somebody, there probably are times when the government has just messed with people. Let's and they do it all the time. But maybe some of that was actually the government, and that's one of those areas that really gives me a headache, because I just cannot figure out what is real, what is paranormal, what might be just some arm of the government having some fun, or maybe they thought they had a purpose or something. But I'm just, if you could see me now, you'd see a huge question mark above my head. I just don't, I just can't fathom how some of this actually comes together.
I think it all becomes, I think when you're in the midst of high strangeness, you follow threads. And I think sometimes you might be led down the wrong thread that doesn't actually relate to what the experience was in the first place. But it seems to me that they're just trying to outlay their experience all the way through, from all the angles they've looked at to what this could be, which is why you seem to get angles that you think, oh, that's a bit of a stretch, but at least they've looked into it, I suppose. Do you know what I mean? Whether or not it's come to anything doesn't mean that they buy into that, possibly.
But they stumbled into some really creepy stuff. So, I don't know if that's happenstance or design, or I just don't know. I wonder if there's going to be a part 3.
They're filming it.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, they're in the middle of filming it. COVID kind of interrupted all that.
Oh, okay. That makes
sense. They are in the middle of Hellier 3. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out for them. And I was lucky enough to speak to them, and they don't know where they're going with it. They admit they're just following threads. They're not. This isn't planned, and this is the laugh of it all. This isn't planned.
Right.
Now,
well, it could be wrong. I mean, when they got that initial contact about the guy that was saying these creatures that supposedly might be the same as the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, and they had those photographs of the footprint, I think, and so forth. Those looked real to me. So I don't know. I just don't know what to make of it. It's one of those, you just get so far and you hit a dead end, and then you don't know what to think about it.
There is another area of high strangeness which I'm going to bring to the table, which is something that's actually been put out there as the missing 411.
Oh, yes.
Would you class that as a level of high strangeness?
Absolutely.
Paul, take over from here, because you love this topic.
just because I've watched the documentary.
Well, I've got his books, and I will confess that when I read his books, I will go into a restaurant in the daytime, surrounded by people eating good food, because the stories in there are so bizarre and creepy, and without any kind of a resolution, that I need to. I don't. that's something you don't want to read at 3 a.m. Out in the wilderness.
True. I agree with
Yeah,
you
I mean,
there.
I can understand where the hunters, when they go out and they totally disappear and are never heard of again. I can understand that they're that if they want to be found, they will be. If they want to hide and stay away from people, again, they know what they're doing. They can avoid people like the plague. But it's when the children go missing. There's a couple in the Missing 411 where I think the family was going off to the lake or the river to do some fishing. And I think he was a 3-year-old little boy, if I remember rightly. Might have been a little bit older than that. And he didn't want to go. And they said, okay, well, you go back with Granddad at the caravan thing. And between the time they said that and getting back to the grandfather, he disappeared. And then, yeah, it's just.
Well, there are situations where they turn around, they lose sight of somebody's ahead of them, and they go over a rise, and then the others come up to the rise, and they're gone. No,
Yeah.
The children sometimes they're found dead, which is really tragic, but other times they're found alive 15 miles away over a mountain range over a period of time where and sometimes they have scratches on them, sometimes they're untouched, sometimes they're well fed and they're warm even though the weather's been bad, and of course David Paulides has a list of and you know what, a lot of the things parallel the tales of the fairies. You hear about berry picking when people disappear. And there's certain times of the year you avoid berry picking because of the little people will take you, and dogs will not track sometimes, as if the person's just been whisked away. Well, dogs were supposed to have been afraid of the fairies. It's really kind of bizarre. Again, you get this other pattern. And also, remember we were talking a little bit about the predator effect, that shimmer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At the end of that of the book on hunters, they talk about, it was Bruce Maccabee and his wife. His wife was a hunter. She was in the deer blind. She saw that blur, that shimmer in the trees. Also, she got that the Oz factor that Jenny Randall's coined, where everything goes quiet. You you can't hear birds, insects, or whatever. Boy, when that happens, strap in, because
in that particular incident, wasn't there a UFO sighting or something over a football pitch in the same town?
Yes, at the same time, she waited. She could see that something was jumping from tree to tree. She took a photograph of it, but she stayed. I think she stayed there for quite some time before she got the nerve to get the hell out of there. Well, about the same time, she got a text from her nephew about a half mile away from the school. They were out there doing band practice or whatever.
That's
and
right.
They saw some kind of a large glowing object at the same time, and that's probably no coincidence. And of course, her husband, who was a photographic expert from the Navy, he analyzed the photograph, and you see the blur, and you see kind of these black hairs sticking out the side. And and also that if you read A Valley of the Skookum is a book about Bigfoot sightings in the Northwest in Ording, Washington, written by Sally Shepard Wolford. She's the mother of Autumn Williams, who is a very famous Bigfoot researcher. Well, they talk about seeing that. They called it the shimmer. And according to the local Native American tradition, that was a portal for Bigfoot to come in and out of. So, again, take that for what that's worth.
Wasn't there an issue with her phone as well? Because didn't they take a picture, but it was the wrong size or something?
Yeah, I can't give you the technology, but the pixelization, I don't think is the right term, but the ratio or something.
Yeah.
The phone should have been incapable of producing that, but somehow it did.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was all on the documentary.
Right.
I remember that.
And I met David Paulides in the Pittsburgh area a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And really, he's boy. Listen, I got to tell you, the first time I heard him, well, I saw him his thing on, I think it was 2012 at Coast to Coast AM. It's something about people disappearing in parks or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't even connect it because right around that time, it was June of June of 2012. I went to the, you've heard of the Stone Chambers in upstate New York. That supposedly a lot of paranormal phenomena occur. Well, I was a friend with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who of course we lost a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And she had been out there near this place called Hawk Rock and saw some, had some bizarre experiences. And I thought maybe if, I don't have anything happen. So I went out there that night and I was alone. I couldn't get anybody to go with me. And you're not really supposed to camp in these watershed areas. But I was there on top of this big rock next to Hawk Rock. And I was there all night. I'm afraid who falls asleep during investigations? I'm afraid I did the same thing.
Richard does.
Like me, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I tried
Richard
to.
does.
I tried to down a couple of 5-hour energy transfusions, but it didn't quite work. So I did.
Oh, right.
You'll actually hear me snoring on my tape recorder, which I have to destroy. But the point is, after this, I start listening to this missing 411 stuff, and I thought, good Lord, I never, ever in a million years. It was kind of silly for me to go out there alone anyway, not too far from civilization. But if I had hurt myself, I could have really. Not a wise thing to do, but
No.
man, oh man, I never in a million years would do that again.
But then
And of
even
course-
if you did go with people, you could still end up going missing.
Oh, sure. But nothing, I didn't, of course, even at least when I was awake, I didn't see anything, but probably all the paranormal activity happened when I nodded off.
Thank goodness.
But yeah, that was, that really has affected me, that his research, and it's the way it's being ignored by the mainstream, and the way how difficult it's been for him to get freedom of information for some of these cases.
Yeah.
And even the book called A Sobering Coincidence, where people are disappearing in urban settings with some of the similar patterns, people disappearing, getting drunk and disappearing from bars, and then being found a month later. And they find out they've been in the water, but they've only been in the water a few days. So where were they for those 3 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's creepy.
Wasn't that resembles one of the cases on that missing 411? I think didn't a lady hiker disappear, and her body was found in the river further down or something, but she was naked.
Well, that's a common. The water seems to be a common element.
Yeah.
But the ones that really get to me are the ones where people come back, sometimes children, sometimes adults, but they're befuddled. They can't tell you exactly what happened to them, and that's really disturbing.
Yeah.
In everything we've spoken about over the last couple of hours, what's the one thing that really scares you?
I guess really the only thing is what we've just been talking about, the idea of these people do vanish under mysterious circumstances sometimes and seem to be absolutely powerless to stop it. And so that's I guess the anything that is that has that degree of futility, of powerlessness. Everything else we've talked about is more of a almost an intellectual pursuit. The fascination with patterns and parallels, and from the past to the present, and the connecting some bizarre Bigfoot sightings with strange lights in the sky. But yeah, the missing 411 stuff and the lack of knowledge that we have on it, the seeming lack of interest from the authorities. I'm sure that there's a faction of the government that is on this, but it's like anything else. If they're powerless, they're not going to admit it. They're absolutely not. And the parks people aren't going to play up the fact that a lot of people disappear from Yosemite and other places and are never found.
I agree. I think it's that, like you say, that level of uncontrollableness, futility is exactly the one, isn't it?
Mm.
Isn't that the thing that we fear as humans the most? That the lack of control in whatever aspect of our life.
Yeah, most definitely. In all the things you've looked into and researched, Steve, what's been the one that really is total that you would dismiss? That's the better way of putting it, more diplomatic way of putting it. What's the one that you would dismiss and go, nah?
Oh boy.
Made you think now.
Oh yeah. Nobody told me I was going to have to think. Damn it. Well, I guess with some of the contact details of yesteryear are certainly bunk. But like I say, there are aspects that it's almost like the paranormal mimicry. You start down a path. Somebody starts a hoax, like maybe the Slender Man is an example, where supposedly it started out as an internet hoax, and allegedly people have seen this apparition. But yeah, I guess some of the contactees. I know if after we're done here, I know I'll think of 2 or 3 great examples, but I just can't. I can't pull them out right now.
So always the way.
Always the way. Yeah, exactly. Always the way. Richard, you've been a little quiet.
I've been listening, yes. Going back, you mentioned a incident in Wales. This going back to the first answer. Toddington or Tiddington, somewhere?
Dyfed. It's spelled Dyfed.
Dyfed.
Yes. Fortunately, the authors tell you how to pronounce it. Otherwise, I'd be saying Dyfed.
Yeah, and the incident the policeman had. Is this the same? Is this part of the same instance when they found a dead person in a coal yard on top of a coal?
That was Alan Godfrey. That was in Todmorden. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right or not.
Right.
England in 1980. He before he had was called out looking for those cattle and had that missing time.
Yeah.
It was a very similar, like a missing 411 experience, where a guy named Adamski, he's going to have his niece, maybe he's getting ready for her wedding, and he goes off. He leaves a group of them to go to a store to go shopping. He disappears for about a week, 10 days or something. They find him dead on top of a coal heap in a train yard with his shirt off and no coal stains on him, as if he was placed up there. Very, very much having the trappings of missing 411. Let me give you one other aspect about the Todmorden case. When he's on board the UFO, some aspects of it are very sort of like fairy lore, where you have the tall entity and you have the short ones, like the fairy queen and so forth. There's that. The guy calls himself Yosef, and Alan is under hypnosis, and he's describing what's going on in this craft, and he stops and he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous." He was describing a large black dog about the size of a German Shepherd, and we all know the folklore of the black shuck, the black spectral dog that haunts the moors and old castles and so forth. What the hell is a black dog doing on what's supposedly an extraterrestrial craft? So again, you get another bizarre connection there. But yeah, that's good to point that out. That experience with Adamski, and that's Jenny Randles covers that in. Was it the Pennines? Is that I'm saying that right?
Yeah.
Pennines, Mr. Yes. Randles has written some really, really good stuff. Let me give you another wild thing. There's a book she wrote, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's more stuff that happened in Northeast Wales in about 79 to 80, 81. And these children were experiencing entities, watching them land and so forth. And it's a long story, but they finally get around to Gaynor Sutherland, who was the youngest, who hasn't said much of anything. They put him under hypnosis, and he talks about his meeting with the entities, and the entities he draws look like the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins. Jenny Randles was blown away. So how does that happen?
Yeah.
Interesting.
How much do you think? I mean, how much of this is an influence by modern culture? The crafts, the Fey lore that's coming in. We've got a lot of ties to, old tales coming through. It's almost like we're linking folklore entities that would have been, back in the olden times, they wouldn't have been in crafts or anything. They would have just had encounters. We've got plenty of those that are documented. Now we're coming into the 60s, 70s, 80s accounts. They're starting to have crafts with them, and we're getting alien abductions. And, how much of this is our own media influence on our external perception of the world?
It could be a great deal if we look at John Keel and his idea of ultra terrestrials, transmogrifications of energy, reflective factor. There could be a good deal there, but okay. For example, how many craft are reported, and how many different varieties are there? How often do we see the same identical craft? How often do we see the same identical entity jump out of the craft? Now, in more modern times, we've got the grays, but it used to be we didn't have much in the way of grays. They would show up once in a while, something that looked like that. I maintain that the Betty and Barney Hill aliens weren't really grays. They were a little bit different. It's almost like the grays would have been a sort of a caricature of them. But if you look back, remember Jim and Cora Lorenzen, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization? They wrote books called Flying Saucer Occupants. We had some really cool occupants back in those days, a nice variety. And then the grays showed up and messed it all up. But the grays didn't seem to me to show up in mass until Close Encounters of the Third Kind in about 77, and Whitley Strieber in the early 80s with Communion and that cover. So if that's correct, did the grays come in and push the other guys out? And a lot of other guys, almost never the identical entity. Or is it something to do with our perception or projection? In some cases, if you looked at the little people, the elemental, in his little green tunic and red cap, if you changed that for a little silver suit, he would have looked a lot like some of the entities we used to see in the 50s, 60s, even 70s. So it is possible, but there was a time when like Keel by the end of the 60s had rejected the ET idea, and he thought it was something else. And I did for a while too. And I think that there's a lot to the, call it, the reflective factor or human consciousness, but there does seem to be, there's some cases that seem to be real physical beings that may not be from other planets. They may be actually from some other dimension or reality somehow. When you look at we talked a little bit about South America. If you look at the bizarre incidents back in the 70s, Bob Pratt, I think it was, wrote a book called UFO Danger Zone. Jacques Vallée verified some of this stuff. There were these bizarre encounters, abduction attempts, these farmers living in very rural areas in Brazil without any really introduction to the pop culture. The craft comes down, hooks would come down and start to pick them up, and they'd have to fight their way out of it. One guy was being pulled up. He looked up inside the craft, and you could see these sort of human-like beings, very cold and disconnected, almost like the idea of the most dangerous game, I think. But he was able to put his foot on the edge of the opening and push off and become free. But he fell a good distance and hurt himself. But there are several cases like this, and it's just it's very negative. It's a lot of people think the Space Brothers are here to help us and guide us. Whoever these bastards were, they weren't. I mean, it does seem like there's some truth to these stories. And one other thing, I'm a correspondent on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, which is also, you can find on the UK Paranormal Radio Network. But we had Bill Ray on a couple times. Bill Ray was one of the original military remote viewers. He studied under Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann, of course, was the gifted psychic that helped develop the remote viewing program. And Bill Ray was the guy that trained some of the famous remote viewers like Skip Atwater and Lynn Buchanan. And I asked him, I said, I know you guys had these wild targets thrown in sometimes that didn't have to do with the military. Well, one time they remote viewed a Argentinian minesweeper that was, I think, abandoned. And what he saw terrified him. He saw this, it was sort of a craft overhead. There was something underneath and the water was bubbling. The men on board were terrified. Some of them were jumping off the craft. And it seemed like there was some kind of an entity on board that was very cold and detached, almost like this was some kind of an experiment. And it absolutely freaked him out. And he said it's the thing that frightened him the most in all the remote viewing targets that he had done. So when I hear stuff like this, I think, okay, the psychic projection, the tulpa, the ultra terrestrial, the apparition doesn't explain everything. Although here's the other idea, the idea of paranormal mimicry. You have some Bigfoot creatures that are flesh and blood. They leave footprints in the Northwest or whatever. You have some alien craft that are real. They're nuts and bolts. And then you have this mechanism in human consciousness that is reflective and makes counterfeit versions of them. So hence you get the bizarre Bigfoots in Pennsylvania in 73 and 74 with the green glowing eyes that disappeared in a hail of sparks when they were shot point blank. There's a really bizarre incident that happened in Pennsylvania that Stan Gordon covered. But and then you get the counterfeit Bigfoot, you get the counterfeit craft or whatever, the projection that changes shape and doesn't make any sense, but you also have the actual objectively real one. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but there does seem to me these days to be kind of a duality. There's certainly not one answer to all these things.
There certainly isn't. On that note, we have actually come to the end of the show, although we could probably talk to you for another 3 or 4 hours, to be fair. So will you promise you'll come back on the show another time and enlighten us? Because I'm going to have to go. I've got a reading pile now of books I'm going to have to go away and get and read from this, and experiences that you've talked about, and look deeper into those in this whole situation of high strangeness. Steve, where can people go and see and listen and read more of your work?
Well, I've got a couple chapters in a couple of books on the Mothman. One was published by Timothy Green Beckley, who we just lost recently, unfortunately, his great publishing empire. It's called Weird Winged Wonders, and it's got a collection of chapters by Brad Steiger and Scott Corrales and a lot of people. I'm currently writing a book, allegedly, should be out sometime this decade. But they can find me on Facebook. Type in Steve Ward. If you type in Battle Creek, as in Battle Creek, Michigan, you probably will find me easier that way. I also have a Facebook page called the Phantom Menagerie, and of course I do the High Strangeness Factor every fortnight.
That's right here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And it's worth a listen to, guys. It's, I catch a few other podcasts, and that's one I definitely keep up with because I find it fascinating.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I really do find it fascinating. Other than ours, of course, boys, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Any news to report, my beautiful men?
Oh, I'm still on episode 3 of the Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
I've nearly finished episode season 2. I've got up to episode 8, so I've got another couple of episodes to go, and that'd be me all up to date on the old Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
Nice, but I am getting right into it. Actually, I've heard of Skinwalker Ranch for ages and never really looked into it that much because it was UFOs.
Right.
but actually, I'm quite baffled by some of the stuff that goes on.
Definitely check out that book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker by Knapp and Kelleher.
Do you know what? I have bought it. I've got it on my Kindle now.
Oh, good deal.
While we were talking, probably.
But also
Yeah.
check out just about anything by Keel. It's got these great anthologies of his articles. Trojan Horse. I think that's fascinating. The Eighth Tower. Even his first book, Jadoo, is when it talks about his experiences in the military, and he traveled through Tibet, and it's just a really, really entertaining book.
Excellent. I shall do that. And incidentally, we have books as well available on Amazon. You can go to our website at www.paranormalconcept.com and go to the publications tab, and they're all there for you to purchase.
Excellent stuff.
And let's give a shout out to Andy Mercer, the guy that
He's
enables
a lovely man.
it enables us to be heard, but by other people than just us.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Shout out to the lovely Andy Mercer. We love that man. He's a very close friend, and we adore him in the background. On that note, we really have run out of time now. I'll get told off for running over if I carry on talking. So thank you once again, Steve, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure and so knowledgeable. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for having me. It's been a great deal of fun, and I can't wait to come back.
Yeah, awesome. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.